Welcome to the attic. If you can hear birds tweeting, it's because there are birds nesting just behind that panel of wood there. Not a lot I can do about that. I wanted to sit down today and have a chat about this lens. This is the 65mm f2 DG DN Contemporary in the I series from Sigma. And it's a bit of an odd focal length for starters. 65mm. It's kind of not quite a standard view, longer than your 50, but still not quite your typical portrait lens, which would be 85mm. But it kind of sits in between, similar to the 75mm from Samyang. All of these focal lengths suddenly appearing in the last year or two, focal lengths we didn't know we wanted or needed. This, compared to the Samyang, is a very different kettle of fish, however, because listen. This is an all-metal construction. It's a lot heavier, and even the lens hood is metal, which is quite beautiful. And this thing is absolutely exquisite. Defining characteristic is probably this rather amazing aperture ring. So it clicks, and it clicks really nicely. Let's be honest. Oh, especially when you switch it to auto, which is a bit of an extra turn. And you'd be forgiven for thinking that the aperture ring is actually mechanical, like on a vintage lens, but no, it's actually electronic. So if you turn the aperture ring, the aperture stays the same until you connect it to your camera. And how Sigma has managed to replicate the feel and actual look of a vintage lens with this 65mm and everything in their little I series of lenses. So that's the 24mm, the 35mm, the 45, and now the 65. It's really quite impressive. These are a joy to use. You can kind of understand why Sigma does this, because they're going after L-mount users as well, which of course includes Leica, and this really wouldn't feel out of place on a Leica. And using this on my A7 III is actually quite refreshing, because the A7 III, it's not a pretty camera. It's basically a box with a load of buttons and plastic flappy doors on the side, and it's not a very pleasant shooting experience. However, this brings a kind of a tactility to shooting with the A7 III that you just don't get otherwise. Even the focusing ring, which I very rarely use, I'm not much of a manual focuser unless I'm using a manual focus lens, that is silky smooth. It's so nice. It's beautifully dampened. Listen to that. Oh, you can't hear it. That's because it's pretty much silent. Yeah, I'm struggling with that. You can probably hear passing traffic before you can hear this. 65mm, like I said, it's a bit of an odd length, but I really enjoyed using this. I kind of like the 75mm from Samyang, which they sent me last year. Really enjoy shooting on that. Having grown up with, spent so much time shooting on a 50mm lens, having the 65 instead of the 85 is actually quite liberating. I find 85 a little bit claustrophobic sometimes. I find myself backing up, or if I'm shooting portraits, often I'm out on location and I actually want to include as much of the background as possible. So 50mm is obviously, is a more obvious choice for me sometimes. 85, a little bit too tight. 65 gives you that extra bit of compression, a little bit more of a blurry background because it brings the background a bit closer, but without cutting off everything and just ripping your subject. I mean, obviously depending on how close you are to your subject, but not taking them completely out of context. So I spent a week in the Pyrenees Mountains, and this is one of the lenses that I took with me, and had a really great time shooting with it. And in the mountains, I was photographing some friends, and I didn't want to take away the impression that they were in the mountains. So just as a day-to-day lens, it's small, it's compact, and it means that you can grab portraits without having to back up too far, and while still being able to retain a certain amount of the environment as you are shooting. In terms of sharpness, absolutely stunning. I mean, it's hard to buy a lens that isn't sharp these days when you spend more than $400, and this is no exception. This is a lot more than $400. I'll put the price in a little text box here because I can't remember exactly what it's selling for. But yeah, I mean, it's razor sharp. It is there's a lot of contrast, and it's a bit funny because you expect a vintage lens to give vintage results. So if you're expecting distinctive, swirly bokeh or anything like that, because of the feel of this lens, you're just not going to get it. This is clinical. I don't mean that in a bad way. For some people, clinical will be a bad thing, but it's not distinctive. It's not full of character. There are no aberrations in it. There's very little focus breathing. And there's very little wrong with this lens. It is a modern, well-made lens with a faux vintage finish, and as I mentioned, that aperture ring makes it an absolute joy to use. This lens also comes with a magnetic lens cap. It doesn't come with this, you have to buy this separately. But this magnetic lens cap, which again, metal, it's actually quite nice. Slots on the front. Wow, I need to improve the autofocus speed on this. Slots on front, and you peel it off. The only complaint I have is that once the lens cap is on, if you've got the lens hood on, you cannot get your fingers in to take the lens cap off. If you enjoy using the metal lens cap, you might want to spend $35, $40 on this little gadget, which basically grabs a hold of your lens as you're wandering about. That's quite nice. I mean, you're never going to reinvent the lens cap, but Sigma's actually come pretty close. Well done. If you like the photos that you've been seeing, you can buy my presets. They're currently available on andyday.com/presets. You can pick them up very cheaply there. Thank you for watching. Like, subscribe, all the rest. You'd really help me out.